Here are a few of the weirdest things that can happen while doing banking. Number 10. Sarah Daisley. Sarah Daisley made Australian and international headlines not just for her bank fraud, but for her fashionable arrest. She made an effort to get arrested in style, wearing a slim gray onesie and gold designer slides. Authorities charged her with 112 fraud-related offenses, which is a pretty impressive amount of scamming. She used fake documents to submit loan applications and launder $500,000. Sarah worked at the same bank she scammed and used her managerial position to steal cash and transfer it to fake accounts she controlled. If you're going to commit fraud, then there's no better job than working at the bank you're trying to scam. She cried in court when she learned that the judge denied her bail, meaning that she'd have to spend Christmas behind bars. However, Sarah's criminal life goes deeper than stealing cash from bank accounts. Her husband, David Sakar, is a convicted drug dealer tied to Australian organized crime. And those 112 charges we mentioned are on top of 15 other charges brought against her a year before. Number 9. Robert Pipes. Robert Pipes, a man from West Monroe, Louisiana, ended up with this mugshot after attempting to cash a fraudulent check. Maybe he could have gotten away with it, but people are bound to remember your face when you look like this. According to the arrest papers, the bank called the police after Robert left. The manager told them that Robert walked in and tried to cash a fake check. The check was for $1,941.16. Maybe Pipes thought writing the check for an oddly specific amount of money would make it seem more realistic, or maybe he just needed that exact amount of money for something. Either way, it didn't end up working out for him. Pipes told the police that it wasn't his fault. He claimed 2 guys had offered to pay him $200 to cash some checks. He said he knew the checks were bad, but he was drunk at the time, so he agreed to do it anyway. Pipes said that the guys dropped him off at the bank and then left. Nobody ever tracked down these masterminds, so it's unknown if they were real or just a creation of Pipes' drunken imagination. Number 8. Cassandra Morales. Cassandra Morales was arrested after police uncovered her unique bank scheme. She used random homeless people she found on the street to help her commit financial fraud. Morales had them go into banks, open an account, and deposit fake checks into those accounts. Then she'd come in and withdraw the money, transferring it to her account. She withdrew over $20,000 in just a few months with this scam, which she ran 26 different times. To avoid detection, Morales had the homeless person open up an account using the minimum cash required. Then, once the account was open, they would only deposit fraudulent checks worth less than $200. Amounts that low don't automatically trigger red flags in the bank system. Eventually, the banks caught on, and police identified Morales and a man she was often with as the primary suspects. They couldn't hide behind their homeless pawns forever. At some point, they had to get the money for themselves, exposing their real identities. Number 7. Eddie Alon. In 2002, Eddie Alon confessed to stealing 250 million shekels from Trade Bank in Israel. She stole the money from customers over 5 years, but hardly spent any of it on herself. Alon stole the money for her brother, Ofer Maximov, to pay off his gambling debts to different organized crime groups in Israel. She tried to save his life and wound up in jail because of it. Both were sentenced for fraud and spent 15 years in jail for their parts in the scheme. Alon's theft was so big that it collapsed the entire bank and cost Israel $500 million shekels in deposit insurance. Alon's scam was so profound that it shook the very fabric of Israel organized crime, redrawing the map of the criminal underground as we know it. Low-level crooks rose to power overnight, with the millions flowing through their illegal casinos. According to Israeli police, the money circulated through the underground economy. It ended up in the pockets of loan sharks, gamblers, crime bosses, and other people who had some slice of Maximov's debts. The money stolen sparked gang wars that lasted for years afterwards. Those wars spilled over into the United States as police busted several arms of the Israeli mafia in Los Angeles. Number 6. Junior and Senior. These next entries align with the more traditional bank scam. You can do all kinds of fun things with your dad, like going to baseball games or arguing about politics. Anthony Inarella Sr. decided bank fraud made for a great bonding activity to try with his son Anthony Inarella Jr. They were arrested together after they tried to withdraw thousands of dollars from a fake bank account they set up. The manager at the Wells Fargo that they tried to scam called the cops on them after they tried to take out $18,000 in cash. Taking out 18 grand in cash isn't normal customer behavior, making the bank rightfully suspicious. Who needs 18 grand in cash other than criminals and people being blackmailed by criminals? The manager told them he had to verify a few things and he could not give them the money right then and there. Anthony Sr. left his phone number with the manager, telling him to call when the money was ready. Instead, the manager called the cops. Police caught up to the father-son team and found what they called a large sum of cash along with several fake IDs. Apparently, they'd committed similar crimes in a nearby country. They were charged with larceny, criminal impersonation, identity theft, and forgery. They should have just thrown the old pigskin around if they wanted to have some bonding time. The court set their bail at $250,000. Number 5. Jamari Britton. Jamari Britton's getaway driver called the cops on him after robbing several banks in Florida. However, his getaway driver never got in any high-speed chases. He was an Uber driver who'd spent the day driving Britton around town. Britton Ubered from bank to bank trying to withdraw money from accounts that weren't his using stolen IDs. When he got arrested, he told police that his name was Andre and handed them a driver's license listing his name as Andre Rodriguez. He claimed he was withdrawing all this cash for a music video, which was a pretty clever excuse. It's pretty common to see rappers throwing around lots of cash in music videos. When police found him, Britton had several different IDs on him. 4 were his, and 3 were completely different people. They charged him with possessing a counterfeit driver's license, giving false ID to law enforcement, fraud, and illegal use of a credit card. These aren't the most common crimes, so at least he gets points for being a little creative. Maybe next time he'll hire an actual getaway driver instead of calling it Uber. Number 4. Robert and Tiffany Williams. Robert and Tiffany Williams, a couple from Pennsylvania, faced felony theft charges when their bank accidentally deposited $120,000 into their account. That was the bank's fault, but the couple spent most of it and actively avoided the bank's calls, quickly turning a random mistake into a legal problem. According to police, they bought an SUV, a camper, 2 four-wheelers, and a car trailer. It sounds like they used the money to plan a sick camping trip. They even gave $15,000 to a friend in need. But how did they get the money in the first place? Somebody did deposit $120,000. However, the bank teller typed in an account number wrong. The person who was actually supposed to get the money asked the bank what was going on, and the bank realized that the Williams family ended up with it. In an interview, Robert blamed poor legal advice that he'd gotten from some people. He probably thought the money was theirs to spend if someone accidentally deposited it. With all the checks and balances banks put in place, many questioned how such an egregious mistake could have happened. Then again, we're not too surprised with all the scammers and swindlers we cover on this channel. Check out this video for the full story on Robert and Tiffany Williams here. Number 3. Nick Leeson. Nick Leeson is an English criminal and former derivatives trader. He committed such massive fraud that he single-handedly brought down Barings Bank, the oldest merchant bank in England. Leeson made unauthorized trades with money that was not his, and he had a bold strategy for trying to make sure he always came out on top. Every time he lost money, he doubled the amount on his next trade to recoup his losses. This worked. Well, it worked for a while anyway. Long enough for Leeson's boss to put him in charge of the bank's futures and options office in Singapore. On January 16th, 1995, Leeson placed a short straddle in the Singapore and Tokyo stock exchanges. Basically, he bet that the Japanese stock market would not move significantly overnight. He wasn't supposed to be doing this, legally speaking, but he did it anyway. That night, the Kobe earthquake hit, sending the market into a crazy tailspin and destroying Leeson's plan. He made a series of increasingly risky bets to try and get the money back before anyone noticed, but nothing paid off. Leeson left a note that read, "I'm sorry," and fled Singapore to hide. He lost $1.4 billion of company money, and the bank never recovered. Leeson stayed on the run for a while, moving to Malaysia, then Thailand, then Germany, but eventually he was arrested and imprisoned. To learn more about how Leeson basically hid his mistakes in a special Oops account, check out the full story in this video. Number 2. Christine Lee. In 2016, a Malaysian student named Christine spent $4.6 million someone deposited into her bank account. She thought the money was put there by her parents. It wasn't. It was actually put there thanks to her bank fraud scheme. Christine was a chemical engineering student studying in Australia. She was arrested while trying to board a flight with an emergency issue passport and charged with dishonestly obtaining financial advantage by deception and knowingly dealing with the proceeds of crime. Basically, stealing and spending stolen money. Saying that she thought her parents gave her the money is a pretty lousy excuse. How did she do it exactly? She opened an account with Westpac Bank where she received regular deposits that were actually from her parents. Her parents sent her enough money to live off of while she was a student, but not enough to live the crazy life of luxury she was after. After realizing that the account had an unlimited overdraft policy, meaning she could withdraw money that wasn't there, she took money out and sent it to herself on PayPal. Over the next 7 months, she sent herself $4.6 million, bundling some of it into 2 different bank accounts. She used the money to go on shopping sprees, the biggest of which saw her spending $300,000 in a single day. Eventually, she got a little too greedy. The bank noticed something was weird when she transferred over $1 million to PayPal in one day. Number 1. Kellen Spadoni. Kellen Spadoni was arrested in April of 2021 and charged with theft, bank fraud, and the illegal transmission of monetary funds. Those are some hefty charges. So what did she actually do? Well, it wasn't entirely her fault. Spadoni attempted to transfer $82 into her bank account, but Charles Schwab, her financial service company, accidentally transferred more than $1.2 million. She should have contacted the company and told them about the error. That's where she made a very illegal mistake. Spadoni transferred the money to another bank account and then bought a new car and house. However, her spending spree didn't last long and the bank tried to take the money back. She got fired from her job working as a 911 dispatcher. She is currently facing civil charges because Schwab came after her with a case saying she ignored the request to get the money back. Come on, who would want to give back $1 million? The company tried to get in touch with her on numerous occasions, but she ignored them. She can't ignore them anymore, but at least she had a good run while it lasted. Most parents want the best for their children, encouraging them to go to school and focus on their studies. Eventually, they'll get a good job if they work hard enough. Not Carla Bellucci. This UK native has other plans in mind for her kids, and she won't be winning Mom of the Year anytime soon. At the start of the COVID-19 pandemic, most parents struggled to balance work and homeschooling their kids. They wondered if their next paycheck would be enough to make ends meet, but not Carla. She had other things in mind. When she wasn't scamming the UK National Health Service, or NHS, and the Universal Credit System, she was helping 2 of her 3 kids with their studies. However, homeschool wasn't on the menu. Instead, she helped 15-year-old Tanisha and 12-year-old Jaden become famous, or at least try. Carla wasn't going to let something like education get in her way. Carla told reporters that she couldn't be bothered to homeschool her children, so she taught them to be famous instead. Social media influencers, reality stars, it doesn't matter to her what route her kids take, only that they rise to fame. Some girls dream of being doctors or lawyers, but not Tanisha. Instead of working on the government-approved curriculum, Carla taught her daughter how to do her makeup, put in hair extensions, and pose for social media. She's constantly following up on Instagram updates and scroll endlessly on TikTok. Tanisha hones her math skills as she calculates how many followers she gained and lost in a day and makes plans on what she's going to post the next day. One of Tanisha's biggest goals is to be on the British dating show Love Island. Tanisha is following in her mom's footsteps, but this isn't the first time Carla's been under fire for what she said and done. Carla's notoriety began in 2019 when she faked depression to get a free nose job from the National Health Service in the UK. What's worse is Carla bragged about it on social media rather than accepting the freebie and moving on. That's not uncommon for Carla. She lovingly refers to herself as the Queen of Blagging. For those unfamiliar with British slang, blagging means lying, flirting, or otherwise manipulating someone else to get what you want. So Carla blagged to get her nose job, letting her morals and better judgment go by the wayside. Her nose wasn't even in bad shape, and it was only noticeable to her and professionals in the field, but Carla was obsessed. She needed to be perfect, so she looked into how much it would cost to fix a small bump on her nose. She was shocked when the surgeon quoted her at £7,000. Carla and the doctor didn't think it was worth that, so she wanted to see what she could do. After all, England has universal health care, so they're all about making sure you get the services you need, regardless of your ability to pay for it. So Carla laid on the charm. She was a single mom of 3 kids. She was depressed over how she looked, and she kept going until her doctor agreed. The nose job would help her depression and self-esteem. It was a necessity for Carla, and she'd get the nose job courtesy of the NHS. That was the last thing on her list before Carla could finally achieve her perfect look. She'd already got other cosmetic surgeries, which she paid for with her own money. They cost a total of £6,200, and it was worth it. Her nose was a different story. She simply wanted a little bump shaved off and the end adjusted. It wasn't even that big of a deal, and no one would have noticed, but to Carla, that slight cosmetic tweak stood between her and perfection. Once she started bragging about her score, people sent her death threats, but Carla didn't see what the issue was. She was just doing what she does best, getting what she wants, no matter the cost, and teaching her kids to do the same along the way. Carla's kids are often pulled into the limelight with her, and they get a lot of backlash because of it, both in person and online. Unfortunately, her daughter was the victim of racial discrimination that was so bad that Carla pulled them out of school to protect their safety and well-being. Her children, Jermaine, Tanisha, and Jaden, all have the same father, but they look different. Carla's ex-husband is of Caribbean heritage. Chance plays a big part in how people look despite having the same parents. Internet users use the kids' different looks to accuse Carla of being unfaithful. It got so bad, the family moved to get away from it all. Still, Carla doesn't take responsibility for these attacks against her family. They started long before she bragged about her nose job, and they'd continue long after. Carla's teaching her kids using the school of life. She's not homeschooling them from any official textbook. Instead, she's teaching them skills that will make them famous. Her kids are not interested in school. That works just as well for Carla because she doesn't have to push to do more than make TikToks. Everyone gets up around 10 a.m. Instead of opening up his laptop to attend e-learning classes, Jaden flips on the TV to binge watch the latest shows. Tanisha wakes up and spends 2 hours getting camera ready with her mom. Together, they put on fake eyelashes, nails, hair extensions, and a full face of makeup. Once she's ready, she's on TikTok, either making videos or watching them. She's growing her following there and on Instagram, just like her mom. While many of Tanisha's posts can be considered scandalous for her age, Carla monitors the accounts, including comments. Her standards may be questionable, though. Friends reach out sharing concerns for Tanisha's posts, but it turns out Carla approved them before Tanisha posted. Carla has already started encouraging her 14-year-old daughter Tanisha to get plastic surgery, thinking it will help secure her future. She focuses more on her appearance rather than her brains, assuming that looks are all she'll need to get by. Carla thinks Tanisha is naturally good looking, yet she thinks surgery will only enhance Tanisha's looks and make her even prettier. Tanisha wants to look like a Kardashian, and she's willing to go under the knife to do so. She even asked for Botox and lip fillers for Christmas, between her requests for a designer purse and horse. Just like her mom, Tanisha seems to be obsessed with plastic surgery and the idea of looking perfect. To her, that's Kylie Jenner, lip fillers and all. Even with her mother's consent, plastic surgery is illegal to perform on children outside of extreme circumstances. However, those limitations don't apply to cosmetic enhancements like Botox and lip fillers. Tanisha will just need to find a doctor who will do it, but it won't be easy. Many professionals refuse to do cosmetic procedures until their patient is at least 18 years old because it could be harmful. Despite setting a £5,500 budget for her children's Christmas gifts alone, Carla gets $1,700 from Universal Credit, the United Kingdom's program to help households in need of making ends meet. Universal Credit is meant for those over the age of 18, but under the age of collecting a state pension in the United Kingdom. It's intended to support those out of work or that have a low income, providing money for basic necessities like housing, child-related expenses, care for those who are sick or have disabilities, and more. You don't have to prove what you use it for, and Carla has used that loophole to her advantage, buying whatever she feels like with these government funds. This is especially true around Christmas. A new Xbox, 2 Mac computers, designer clothes, driving lessons, you name it. Carla knows people call her a scrounger, but she sees it as doing what it takes to support her kids, including gaming the Universal Credit system. Despite coming forward with these claims, Carla hasn't had to pay any money back. Instead, she continues to take it all in and teach her kids to do the same. Wait until you hear what she makes on OnlyFans, then your blood will really boil. Carla has a solid Instagram following and turned to OnlyFans to make additional money. She's in the top tier of content creators on the adult platform and claims she even made £100,000 posting pictures of her pregnancy bump. She considered live streaming the birth, but decided against it after complications with her pregnancy that led to an elective C-section. The most important factor that led to Carla pulling the plug on the live live stream was that the baby came early. She couldn't get her hair, nails, and Botox done. She didn't feel camera ready. Carla saw nothing wrong with it. She even likened it to a British reality show called One Born Every Minute, which shares the experiences of those giving birth in the UK. Still, Carla decided not to go through with it. Blue Gianna was born on September 21st, 2021, but before she was even born, she helped support her family. They bought a house with the money Carla got selling pictures during her pregnancy. She didn't seem too worried about losing the income she planned for the live stream. Carla's oldest son, Jermaine, stays out of his mother and sibling schemes. He's especially embarrassed by his mom because his friends think that she's attractive. Jermaine has been mortified. His friends follow her on social media and see all the scandalous things she gets up to. Jermaine sits with his mom to block and unfriend people so they can't see. He's even tried to log into her accounts to make it private or delete them, but Carla always sets it right back. Jermaine wants his mother to change the way she dresses and acts. He wants her to be like the other moms, but that's not her. Carla takes pride in being fit and attractive, dressing trendy and getting things for free because of her looks. She thinks taking care of herself in this way sets an excellent example for her kids. Tanisha may want to follow in her footsteps, but not Jermaine. If he sees her on the street, he crosses and pretends like he doesn't know her. If he's asked to take pictures for social media, he messes them up on purpose. Carla may be fond of blagging, but Jermaine is working hard to distance himself from her. At the end of the day, Carla sees nothing wrong with her actions. It's all to help support her family. In 2020, the Amidi family tried to sell their Southern California home for $30 million. The house was 3 stories tall and featured a full-size tennis court. It had 18,000 square feet of indoor space and a full view of Los Angeles. The SoCal mansion had a long history of upper-class tenants long before the Amidi brothers. Elizabeth Taylor once called it home, and Mike Tyson even made moves to buy the property in 1997. But then he bit off someone's ear and the deal fell through. The estate changed hands between Hollywood directors and retired NBA stars before finally falling into Prince's lap in 2005. He was renting it for $70,000 per month, but when he replaced the carpets with monogram purple shag and painted the driveway purple, the landlord kicked him out. The property changed hands again, being purchased by the founder of Rockstar Energy Drinks. However, when the housing market collapsed in 2010, he offloaded the mansion to 2 multi-million-dollar Beverly Hills doctors running the most popular weight loss program in town. It soon became the Amidi's turn to sell the house, but why sell a home this extravagant? Well, the family couldn't use it anymore. In 2020, the Amidis were in the middle of a massive investigation and facing 20 years in prison for the most extensive and deadliest weight loss scam in history. If you lived in the Los Angeles metro area between 2010 to 2016, you probably saw one of these 1-800-GET-THIN billboards. There were TV commercials too. 1-800-GET-THIN was a marketing firm that contracted its services to private weight loss companies. These companies, in essence, used Get Thin to market their products on TV and billboards. Dr. Julian Amidi helped found Get Thin with businessman Robert Silverman in 2010, though Silverman resigned in 2012. By then, 2 things were happening. The authorities were investigating Get Thin, and the Amidi family had taken over the company. Even though Silverman was the firm's president, he wasn't really the one in charge. Get Thin was a family business. If Get Thin was a family business, Julian was the patriarch, despite not being the oldest in the family. Julian not only helped found the company, but he designed the Get Thin system and integrated his family into it. He first brought his brother Michael, a plastic surgeon, into the company and made him part owner alongside Silverman. Though it's unclear how involved she was, Julian's mom, Cindy, was added to the Get Thin team. Unlike her sons, Cindy was not a physician. Together, they helped build the business. 2 years after they founded Get Thin, the family and the entire company were investigating for defrauding their patients and insurance providers out of $355 million. And as investigators would discover, Get Thin was only the first act of a much bigger play. Remember the weight loss companies we mentioned earlier? Well, Julian and Michael owned 2 of those companies. The primary company they sent patients to was Amidi Surgery Management. The other was called Independent Medical Services. The Amidi Surgery and Independent opened most of their locations around Southern California. Beverly Hills served as the core of their company and culture. Beverly Hills is a very image-conscious area. It has a reputation for hosting fit and healthy residents like famous Hollywood actors and actresses. In other words, Beverly Hills embodied weight loss. It was a Get Thin billboard all on its own. For that reason, the Amidis built their business there in West LA, fitting right in with all the other plastic surgery centers and weight loss clinics. However, the Amidis didn't use the same methods as plastic surgeons or nutritionists. Instead, they used lap bands. Lap bands aren't actual bands, at least not what you're probably thinking of. It's more like an inflatable silicone belt. This belt gets wrapped around the entrance to your stomach and restricts the amount of food that goes in. Basically, you feel full much quicker, thus needing to eat less to satisfy that feeling. The procedure is simple and very popular. People who struggle with obesity but can't diet and exercise, or simply don't want to, can force themselves to lose weight with lap bands. However, the surgery plus the lap band itself are expensive. Most people need their insurance provider to cover those costs, and if they don't, they can't afford the procedure. But that's not the approach Julian and Michael took while operating their weight loss centers. The Amidis' unique lap band procedure required every applicant to participate in a sleep study. Keep in mind, no other known lap band provider requires a sleep study. The Amidis argued they were necessary for testing patients for sleep apnea, a breathing condition that disproportionately affects people suffering from obesity. Their logic sounded reasonable enough, but in reality, there was no medical reason for the required sleep study. There was, however, a monetary one. Whenever a patient called the 1-800-GET-THIN number, the sales team urged them to participate in the sleep study. However, the Amidis didn't have time to oversee the day-to-day sales operation. They couldn't be there to make sure their employees were putting in the effort needed to reel in a consistent flow of sleep study applicants. So, the Amidis offered their employees a commission for every sleep study patient they sold to. The commissions worked very well. Amidi Surgery and Independent tricked hundreds of people into participating in their bogus studies. These studies were a double whammy for both the patient and insurance companies. Most patients were told that their insurance would cover the sleep study costs. However, they weren't told how much the study would cost if they didn't qualify. In other words, if the insurance company didn't get scammed, the patient would. But the Amidis didn't care which party got stuck with the bill, as long as someone paid up. And those payments could get very high, especially for something as simple as a sleep study. Several patients received $15,000 in medical bills from the Amidis in the mail. These fees added up to over $38 million when counted by investigators from 2012 to 2016. Aside from the exorbitant fees, the Amidi sleep studies also served another purpose: to funnel prospective patients into the operating room. The doctors and nurses conducting the sleep studies were instructed by the Amidis to diagnose the patients with sleep apnea. It didn't matter whether or not they actually suffered from the disorder. On several occasions, the Amidis medical staff would falsify the patient's weight, inflating the number so they'd look more obese on paper. The goal was for the surgery centers to sell as many lap band installations as possible. The Amidis knew that if their patients met the coverage requirements, they could force the insurance companies to pay for the procedures, even if the patient didn't qualify for the procedure. Those insurance companies ended up paying hundreds of millions of dollars to the Amidi family. And most of the companies were healthcare benefit programs like Anthem Blue Cross, United Healthcare, and TRICARE. The insurance companies lost a lot of money, and so did the patients, who, on rare occasions, lost much more than their money. Amidi Surgery, Independent, and Get Thin have been sued several times since 2010. One of their most infamous cases, involving former patient Laura Fatro, was particularly eye-opening. It exposed not only the mindset of the Amidi family, but also exposed some dirt on the Amidi brothers. Laura Fatro was just like any other Get Thin patient. She saw the ads on TV, called the number, made the appointment, and participated in the sleep test. However, when Laura arrived at the operating table, something went terribly wrong. After waking up, Laura started experiencing severe pain near her stomach. She assumed it was from the surgery and went home, not realizing that her liver was lacerated. Laura passed away shortly after, and her autopsy revealed the lacerated liver. Laura's husband John was told the mortal affliction must have occurred during her lap band surgery. John filed a lawsuit against the Amidi-run weight loss center. The doctor who performed Laura's surgery, Dr. Ihan Shaman, was worried. He claimed in court that when he approached the boss, Julian, about the incident, he said not to worry about it. He claims Julian told him that a lawsuit wouldn't be a big deal because they made $21 million a month. Dr. Shaman never saw his job the same way again. He later testified against Julian and the other doctors involved in the Get Thin scam, but not before 4 other victims lost their lives to botched surgeries. Their 5th and last victim was Paula Rajeski. She passed away in September 2011. Her friend asked her not to get the surgery, telling Paula that she didn't even need it. Nevertheless, Paula wanted to be thin, like the people in Beverly Hills. She didn't even make it off the operating table alive. When the police discovered that Paula had lost her life at an Omidi clinic, they put two and two together. LAPD Homicide launched an investigation into Paula's passing and searched for any evidence that would lead back to the Omidi brothers. The detectives and other law enforcement agencies found some harrowing evidence, mainly from disaffected doctors like Dr. Shaman and his former co-worker, Diane Duell. Diane led the medical support staff until she quit after seeing how the Omidis ran their business. She described the patient care as well below average, to say the least. Diane said the clinic sent patients home despite complaining about abdominal pain and shortness of breath. Authorities listened to these testimonies and others by former patients, eventually deciding to indict the Omidis in 2018. Besides law enforcement, the media also did some investigating of their own. Paula's strange passing prompted LA Times journalist Michael Hitzik to investigate the Omidi family specifically. He discovered some very suspicious background information on the two alleged doctors. For starters, he found out that Julian and Michael don't perform any of the surgeries themselves, and perhaps for good reason. Julian got caught trying to steal exam papers to cheat on a test in college, and his medical license was later revoked, though he did get it back later on in his career. Michael also lost his medical license privileges for 3 years before being reinstated in 2011. Judging by their record, these two brothers weren't highly esteemed medical professionals, but they were expert criminals. The Omidi family was arrested in early 2018. Julian, Michael, and even their mother, Cindy, faced charges. Julian in particular faced several counts, including identity theft, conspiracy to launder money, 28 counts of wire fraud, and of course, 2 counts of making false statements relating to healthcare matters. In 2021, Julian was convicted on all counts. He's looking at 2 years in prison with a maximum sentence of 20. Julian and Michael's mother, Cindy, was charged with conspiring to launder money and sentenced to probation. On the other hand, Michael is still practicing medicine in Southern California as a plastic surgeon. Whether or not he is charged with any crimes remains to be seen. With all the negative publicity, Michael and his family's future looks pretty grim. On a partly cloudy day in Chicago, TJ Jimenez and his friend Jose Roman were driving around in TJ's Mercedes convertible. Roman filmed their drive on his smartphone while a .22 caliber Mossberg semi-automatic rested against his ankle on the car floor. Meanwhile, Jimenez was armed with a custom-made blue-plated pistol. The car rolled up on a lone man on the sidewalk as he walked on the driver's side. Jimenez confronted the man, then abruptly pulled his gun out, leaned over the door, and fired 2 shots into the man's thighs. If those first bullets didn't work, Jimenez had several more rounds packed in a Gucci luggage bag on the car floor. Minutes later, Jimenez sped away from a group of cops, lights flashing, tires screeching, until he finally crashed his Mercedes and the chase ended with their arrest. Why did Jimenez shoot this man? What did Jimenez tell the man before he shot him? Did the time spent in jail turn this vulnerable teen into a seasoned criminal? Jimenez entered the criminal directory at 13 when he was convicted of murder. The victim was a 19-year-old man named Eric Morrow, and on February 3rd, 1993, someone shot him dead on a block in East Chicago. By who? The police weren't sure until they decided to charge Jimenez. On paper, he seemed like the perfect person to convict. Jimenez's uncle introduced him to gang life in Chicago at an early age. The Honorable Judge Christy Burkos took one look at Jimenez and only saw how much he looked like, quote, a little punk who was probably too young to shave, but old enough to commit vicious murder. In addition to the profiling by Judge Burkos, a couple of witnesses claimed he was near the murder scene. It was enough to put young Jimenez in prison for 16 years. That was until something remarkable happened. Guards carted Jimenez off to prison in 1993. Then, in 2009, new evidence came to light that proved Jimenez could not have committed the Morrow murder. In 2009, an old confession resurfaced, and it wasn't Jimenez's. The confessor's name was Juan Carlos Torres. He was recorded on a tape confessing to the murder 16 years ago. Though it was a clear admission of guilt, the confession was deemed inadmissible by law, and Torres got off scot-free. Torres was also 13. While young Torres was going to school like an average teenager, Jimenez stood in front of 12 people who in '93 voted to convict him of murder. Then not long after, Judge Burkos sentenced Jimenez to 45 years in prison. Jimenez spent 16 years behind bars, starting at the formative age of 13. 13. While most kids are getting ready for high school, learning how to be an adult, dating, playing video games, and taking tests, Jimenez was sent to a state-run youth facility in Illinois. Though he was incarcerated with kids his age, Jimenez was small for 13. His fellow juvenile inmates constantly harassed him and would even jump Jimenez from time to time. Jimenez would later say he suffered from depression at the youth facility. His mental health didn't improve much when he moved to an adult prison after aging out of the juvenile prison at 17. In the adult prison, Jimenez was treated even worse. Jimenez claims both the guards and inmates terrorized him every single day. Eventually, the teenager decided to fight back against the abuse. Unfortunately, Jimenez's toughness backfired. Whenever he fought back against a guard or inmate, he was forced into segregated areas where he spent most of his time without human contact. Jimenez would later say all his anger, depression, and despair spilled over under the confines of solitary. So, whenever he was allowed back into public areas, Jimenez released his emotions on anyone who antagonized him. Jimenez was sent to solitary so often that he spent 4 consecutive years of his sentence all by himself. With all that alone time, Jimenez worked hard on getting a second chance to defend his innocence. For 16 years, Jimenez mailed dozens of letters pleading to lawyers and advocacy groups like the Innocence Project to take his case, arguing that he still has a chance. In 2005, a group of attorneys and law students working for the Northwestern University Bloom Center specializing in wrongful convictions decided to help Jimenez prove his innocence. Sure enough, when the team brought Jimenez's case back to court, the prosecutor's arguments fell apart. The 2 witnesses who said they saw Jimenez at the crime scene recanted their statements. But the nail in the prosecutor's proverbial coffin was the resurgence of Torres's confession. When there's evidence disappeared, the courts decided to acquit Jimenez in 2013. He was a free man. Subsequently, the local government felt obliged to pay Jimenez $25 million. Of course, that was only after a lawsuit. The money was supposed to be consolation for taking 16 imperative years away from the 37-year-old. Jimenez went from a convicted murderer destined to be released in middle age to a multi-millionaire in just 1 year. Despite the victory, Jimenez didn't celebrate. He got right to work on building a new life in Chicago. The time Jimenez spent in prison molded him into its image. The people inside, not the bars or the walls, changed Jimenez, but not necessarily for the better. Prosecutors say Jimenez gave his lawyers around half of the $25 million apology payment. As for the other half, most of that went to the Simon City Royals. The Simon City Royals are an old street gang. Their origins date to the 1950s, where the gang grew from greasers decked out in leather jackets to the facial tattooed drug heads you see today. They're a big deal in Chicago, and Jimenez wanted to revitalize the gang, the same gang his family and friends belonged to. His uncles, the only father figures Jimenez had, raised him to follow in their footsteps. And young Jimenez seemed to be cut from the same stone. His criminal activity started while Jimenez was still in elementary school. They were minor offenses like skipping school too many times and taking illegal drugs. His mother, who spent all her time working, was powerless to stop her son from becoming a juvenile delinquent, nor did she have enough money to send him to a better school. Instead, everything he learned came from the Simon City Royals. Given his family's generational involvement with the Royals, Jimenez waltzed back into the gang like a prince returning from war, ready to take back his birthright. Only gangs aren't kingdoms. Jimenez would have to buy his way back into the gang. Jimenez ended up spoiling them like they were his long-lost children, and in a way they were. However, all of the gift-giving came with a price of sorts. Jimenez returned to Chicago with around $13 million, and it was more than enough. He could have bought himself a lovely house, gotten a job, or become an inspirational speaker. He could have settled down with his beautiful girlfriend Jessica and lived out the rest of his days in relative peace. As peaceful as a wrongfully convicted inmate could live. Instead, Jimenez picked up where he left off. Except this time, he was a millionaire. He spent most of his money and time going on massive shopping sprees. Jimenez bought fellow Royal gang members expensive sports cars, including a Mercedes sports car for himself, along with Gucci products, jewelry, and lots of guns. The Simon City Royals looked legit. However, Jimenez demanded more from the Royals. He wanted to turn them into a real gang like Bloods and Crips in California, who like to use bandanas and tattoos to show their gang's pride. Jimenez wanted other gangs to know whenever they were in the presence of a Simon City Royal. So he started offering cash prizes for anyone willing to get the Royals logo tattooed on their face. In addition to the tattoo bonuses, Jimenez also paid recruits to join the gang. Ultimately, Jimenez wanted to create loyalty. With the face tattoo incentives, the fancy cars, designer suitcases, Jimenez bought the Simon City Royals' loyalty, making himself one of their leaders. After spending most of his time alone, Jimenez must have felt liberated. He had a family again, people he could talk to and depend on. Jimenez was a royal, possibly the best royal ever. Jimenez had brought the old Chicago gang back to its former glory using his state-funded restitution. Jimenez wanted everyone to know what he'd accomplished. He had a plan, too. His plan involved using social media to show how he would show old enemies, friends, and former gang members that he was the savior of the Simon City Royals. Along with his social media plan, Jimenez also had a list of current and former royal members he deemed imposters. Authorities found the list in a letter written by Jimenez in Cook County Jail days after the police chase on Belmont Avenue. In the 6-page letter, Jimenez wrote about his plans to make an example of these so-called imposters when he got out again. Jimenez claimed these gang members had accepted money from him but never contributed anything to the gang. Put another way, the imposters were money-grabbing freeloaders. Jimenez wanted to ensure their actions did not go unpunished. One such man who apparently had feigned loyalty was Earl Castile, a former royal who had joined the gang during Jimenez's big payout. When Jimenez pulled up on Earl, the former royal acted friendly towards them until Jimenez pulled out his blue-plated pistol and asked, "Why shouldn't I blast you right now?" Instead of waiting for an answer, he went ahead and pulled the trigger. Then the video cuts to black. During the trial in 2014, the jury watched the video of Jimenez shooting Castile. It didn't take them long to decide a guilty verdict. The judge sentenced Jimenez to 9 years in prison. The prosecutors wanted 10. And, just like that, Jimenez was back in prison. He had spent nearly half his life behind bars and would spend the next decade there as well. In a way, he was returning home. However, Jimenez's story traced back to that fateful day in 1993 when the 13-year-old could have been put on a different path. Sadly, life in prison only cemented the gang mentality he'd grown up with. Here are a few of the weirdest kidnapping scams. Number 9. Lauren Lorenzetti. Lauren Lorenzetti is a former Brazilian beauty queen and influencer who appeared to have it all. Then, her house of cards fell on top of her, exposing a decades-old secret. Lauren staged her own 2010 kidnapping with her then-boyfriend and friends. In April 2010, Vanessa Bassini received a phone call straight out of her nightmares. Her daughter, Lauren, had been kidnapped. First, the would-be kidnappers wanted about $500 in ransom money for her release, but then it was quickly up to nearly $40,000. When Vanessa called the police, they got spooked, demanding that the police be removed from the situation or they'd hurt Lauren. What Vanessa didn't know was her daughter, her friends, and her boyfriend were the ones on the line making these demands. Lauren left when the stakes got too high and called her mom from a nearby payphone, asking her to pick her up. Lauren went on to win Miss Renescenca 2012 and Miss Parana Popularidad 2013, and she thought she'd gotten away with everything. However, police arrested Lauren for extortion over a decade later, a charge that comes with a 6-year prison term. To make matters worse, Lauren was pregnant when they took her in. Number 8. Carol Sanchez. Plenty of kids don't think their parents understand them, but a few rarely stage a kidnapping to get their point across. That's what 16-year-old Carol Sanchez did when she learned her parents wanted to move back to Honduras. Carol wanted to stay in the United States to be with her boyfriend, so she arranged for 2 males to abduct her while walking with her mother in the Bronx, New York. As they whisked her away, the men pushed her mom to the ground while 2 more men waited in the car for a quick getaway. The police jumped into action but couldn't find any leads. After an Amber Alert and days of news coverage, Carol walked back onto the scene shaken up and turned herself in. She confessed to the whole thing, admitting she planned it because she thought her mother was overprotective and she wanted to spend time with her boyfriend. Carol clearly didn't think that all the way through when she faked something so dangerous just to prove a point. She wasn't charged for her role in the fake kidnapping, but hopefully learned that young love isn't worth a criminal history. Number 7. Vincent Oguro. Vincent Oguro was out with some friends when he thought he'd play a prank, but he never thought his idea of a joke would lead to charges of filing a false police report. The 19-year-old was at a Texas restaurant, but when it came time to pay the bill, he left the staff a terrifying surprise. A message that said he needed help. He had been kidnapped and gave them a number to call. Stunned, the restaurant contacted the police, and an investigation was quickly underway. It didn't take long for police to feel suspicious. The surveillance footage showed a regular dinner with friends. Vincent didn't appear distressed, and the group had only left 10 minutes prior. Once the police found an address tied to one of Vincent's friends, it was only a matter of time before they tracked him down. After a few near misses at apartments in the complex, police finally found Vincent at a party, and he quickly confessed. It was all a joke. Vincent just wanted to prank his friend, and it was all a big misunderstanding. Except, Vincent admitted he knew the police would be called when the restaurant found the note. He was slapped with charges and released on a $5,000 bond, aspiring to prank, more appropriately, another day. Number 6. Brandon Souls. Jobs come and go, but a criminal record can last forever. 19-year-old Brandon Souls learned that lesson and then some when he decided to fake his own kidnapping rather than go to work. Brandon was found gagged, roughed up, and bound by the side of the road in Coolidge, Arizona. He told police that he'd been kidnapped by two men looking for money his father allegedly hid in the town somewhere. They'd knocked him out and drove him around before ditching him at the side of the road. But the video surveillance told a different story. There was none. Despite having text messages, there was no evidence to back up Brandon's claim, and that's when his story fell apart. It turns out, Brandon did it to himself. He stuffed a bandana in his mouth, bound his hands with his own belt, scooted around on the ground to get dirty, and then he just waited to be found. Everything had worked according to plan until the police started to do what they do best: investigate. Brandon staged the entire thing to avoid going to work, but now that won't be a problem. He was fired from the job and pleaded guilty to reporting false information to the police. What was his job, you wonder? Could it be so bad that faking his own kidnapping was the only way to get the day off? Brandon worked at a tire factory in Coolidge, and he probably wishes he had just called out sick. Number 5. Patty Hearst. Patty Hearst was a celebrity in her own right. She's the granddaughter of publishing mogul William Randolph Hearst and was kidnapped in 1974 by the Symbionese Liberation Army, a small extremist group in the United States known as the SLA. 3 armed strangers took the then 19-year-old from her Berkeley, California apartment. They left her fiancé tied up in the apartment as they carried her off blindfolded to the trunk of a car. 3 days later, the SLA called a Berkeley radio station, stating they had Patty as a prisoner of war and demanded the Hearst family donate $70 to every person in need who lived from Santa Rosa to Los Angeles. The Hearst family complied, donating more than $2 million worth of food, but the SLA wanted more. What would follow was a series of strange occurrences where Patty participated in armed robberies and answered only to the name Tanya. She said she joined the SLA of her own volition, but when Patty was eventually caught, she backtracked, claiming that the SLA brainwashed her. Regardless, she still had to serve time for her crimes. This only scratches the surface of this bizarre case, so be sure to check out the full video here. Number 4. Katie Sorensen. Going viral can be a blessing and a curse, and no one knows that better than Katie Sorensen. The aspiring influencer turned to Instagram to share her story of attempted child abduction after police refused to help her. She gained thousands of followers, millions of views, and months later, a criminal record. Katie said she was shopping at Michael's in Petaluma, California, when a man and a woman followed her around the store. At one point, they even commented on how her children looked and followed her out, only leaving after they realized they weren't alone in the parking lot. Terrified, Katie filed a police report, but they did nothing. That's when she turned to social media, which was the beginning of the end for Katie. Her story changed. The couple didn't just talk to her, instead the man tried to snatch her stroller. That elevated the case into an attempted abduction, and during the investigation, it turned out that's not what happened at all. The other couple was simply shopping, and Katie made it all up. So who was this mystery couple? Sadie and Eddie Martinez were questioned by police as they admitted to being the couple shown in the photo and store surveillance footage. But they found it funny because they have 5 kids. Why on earth would they try to steal Katie's? They did grow concerned and upset that Katie would make up such a horrible story about them. No witnesses nor footage could corroborate Katie's story. Katie was charged with giving false information to a police officer and a police dispatcher, but the jury is still out on whether or not justice has been served. For Sadie, she wanted Katie to be charged with a hate crime. Number 3. Susan Mize. In 2008, 17-year-old Susan Mize went from aspiring model to aspiring inmate when she set up her friend to be robbed, all while painting herself as the helpless victim. It all started innocently enough. Susan called 20-year-old Preston Berry to give her and a friend a ride from Spring, Texas to Houston. She even offered him $150 to do it, but as they say, no good deed goes unpunished. Things went downhill quickly when Preston arrived. Just as he picked up Susan and her friend, another 15-year-old male approached the car. Preston thought he had a weapon, was afraid for his life, so he did what they told him. The kidnappers roughed up Preston. They even took him to an ATM to get more money out. This is where Susan's part of the story ends. After the ATM, he dropped Susan off at home, and because she was the mastermind, she never called the police. However, Preston's quick thinking saved his life. He told his attackers that he had more money at home, but he quickly ran inside, locked the doors, and called the police when they arrived. In the end, Susan and her friend were charged with aggravated robbery for the plot, and Preston learned a crucial lesson: be careful who you trust. Number 2. Carla Vasquez. 32-year-old Carla Vasquez learned the hard way that the truth is always better than lies. She cheated on her husband and then faked her own kidnapping to cover it up. After Carla got off her shift bartending at a local adult entertainment club, she called her husband David in a panic to say 2 men were sitting outside their home. When he got home from work, Carla, their car, and the men were nowhere in sight. Terrified, David called his wife, who informed him that she'd been kidnapped. He quickly notified the police, who wasted no time looking for Carla. A few hours later, police found her driving the car, the same car she said the kidnapper stole. Under pressure, Carla's web of lies unraveled. She had not been kidnapped. She just didn't want her husband to know she cheated on him. Carla faced charges of faking a crime, which could carry a fine of $1,000 and up to 1 year in jail. Her husband obviously found out about the infidelity, so hopefully Carla learned her lesson that honesty, no matter how hard, is always the best policy. Number 1. Kidnapping phone scam. We've all gotten calls from an annoying phone scammer. According to the FBI, there's a new scam in town, and it might be the most frightening one yet. Attackers spoof your loved one's phone number to call and say they have been kidnapped. You'll hear some crying and scuffling, someone that's clearly in distress before the would-be kidnapper comes on the phone to demand money. Transfer whatever total they tell you. No one will get hurt. Don't, and they will hurt your loved one. In a panic, you may be tempted to transfer the money. It seems like a no-brainer, especially because it came up on your caller ID as their actual phone number. No matter how terrifying it may seem, this is the latest phone scam. It's preying on your adrenaline to override your good sense and transfer the money without thought. Some who've fallen victim to this scam said the person on the other end thanked them or said God bless you. If you find yourself in this situation, try to keep calm and text your loved one. At 1:15 p.m. on February 16, 2011, a man called the police to report a dangerous and potentially intoxicated driver in the parking lot of Plaza Vista Elementary School in Irvine, California. The caller told Officer Charles Shaver that he saw drugs in the driver's PT Cruiser and knew the woman driving the car. Her name was Kelly Peters. Everyone in Irvine loved Kelly. She was PTA president, a trustworthy mom, and a volunteer for the after-school classroom enrichment program. She always wore a peace sign necklace to school. She grew up working a variety of jobs at restaurants and skating rinks. She moved to Hawaii for 2 years. Then, craving stability, she settled in Irvine, California, one of the safest cities in the state, perfect for raising a family. But in February 2011, Irvine police arrived at the school parking lot looking for Kelly's PT Cruiser. They found 17 grams of marijuana and an assortment of prescription pills. She fell to her knees sobbing, denying that the drugs were hers. She said it was impossible. She was already inside the school at the time. Charles Shaver was a veteran in law enforcement, a sniper on the Irvine police SWAT team, and an NCIS investigator with the Marines. "Those aren't mine" was an excuse he had heard countless times. But unlike other busts, Kelly passed all of the sobriety tests. It seemed like the drugs were in plain sight, waiting to be discovered. When Officer Shaver called back the original 911 caller, there was no answer. The number he gave was fake. He asked to search Kelly's apartment, and she agreed. They found nothing. Something did not seem right. Kelly had an enemy. Jill and Kent Easter were a wealthy power couple. They were Stanford and Berkeley Law School alumni and successful lawyers in Irvine. They lived in a big white house with 3 kids and a cat. The perfect suburban life. But there was something darker. The Easters hated Kelly. So after the police found drugs in her car, Kelly believed the Easters had planted them. To her, they weren't a power couple. They were, quote, the couple from hell. 1 year before the drug bust, Kelly was trying to rally the kids after a rowdy tennis class at the after-school enrichment program. She lined them up and walked them through the building to meet their parents outside. But the Easter's 6-year-old boy had been slow to line up. Amid the chaos of lining up the others, Kelly accidentally left him outside. One of the tennis coaches found the boy and walked him to the front desk. His mom, Jill, was furious. She wondered if something had happened to her son that Kelly and the tennis coach weren't saying. Jill questioned how Kelly could sleep at night, knowing how she treated people. Jill claimed that her son had been locked out of the school for almost 20 minutes the next day. She wrote a letter to the school saying Kelly blamed the little boy for getting left behind. In fact, Kelly loved Jill's son. She admired his artistic skills and participation in the enrichment program. The program director interviewed both Kelly and the tennis coach about the incident and concluded Kelly did nothing wrong. It was a simple mistake that can happen when one adult manages many kids. Still feeling the wrath of Jill's anger, the school principal, Heather Phillips, called her. Easter said she didn't want Kelly and the tennis coach to hurt more children. She and her husband approached parents to complain about Kelly on their way into school. Principal Phillips warned them to tread lightly as their crusade could be viewed as harassment. Jill argued that she was within her rights, vowing to continue until Kelly was fired. She even started a campaign with stickers and posters to make Kelly leave. Jill asked Irvine police to look into the situation, but the police found no evidence of a crime. Things were getting blown out of proportion. Kelly was upset. She had volunteered at the school for years, and this was the first disgruntled parent she'd encountered. She stressed over how the controversy could affect the school and her kids. She told Principal Phillips she would leave if that would make things easier. The principal said no. Jill asked for a restraining order against Kelly, saying that Kelly had been stalking, harassing, and threatening her and her son. The court said absolutely not. Kent filed a civil suit against Kelly, arguing that his son suffered intense mental and emotional distress from the incident. He said that Kelly was a willing and malicious enabler of his son's trauma. However, the Easters quickly dropped the suit. They got a refund for the after-school enrichment program, which instituted a head count routine before the kids returned to their parents. Despite Jill and Kent's campaigns against Kelly, she won the title of PTA president in 2011. Soon after, police found drugs in her car. Almost a year since the Easter boy was left outside at tennis practice, Irvine police found drugs in Kelly's car. It was no coincidence, but she wasn't 100% positive that the Easters were behind this. It could also be the father who lived across the street from the school and was known for strange behavior. The police had been called on him before for wandering around the school without permission, shouting at school employees and crossing guards, and videotaping the crosswalk as kids went home. Kelly felt sorry for him, but wondered if he could have planted the drugs in her car. After Kelly won the title of PTA president, he asked for a copy of the bylaws, possibly seeing that drug possession would disqualify her from the position. In some ways, he seemed a more likely culprit than two successful lawyers. Or maybe it was her rival in the race for PTA president. Mark Andriozzi was the lead detective on the case. He studied the 911 call and noticed that the caller gave a fake name, Vijay Chandraskar, and claimed to have a daughter at the school. But the school had no students with that last name. Andriozzi noticed that the caller offered more information than most other callers and somehow developed an Indian accent partway through the call. They traced the call to a phone on the ground floor of the Island Hotel, a luxury high-rise resort in Newport Beach. It happened to be near Kent's law firm. More importantly, it's nowhere near the elementary school. When they looked at security camera footage in the building, they saw a man resembling Kent walking in. Detectives tracked the Easters' phones and noticed that they had exchanged 15 texts in suspicious locations on the day of the incident, some near their home and some near Kelly's apartment complex. After months of investigation, police finally had enough evidence to search the Easters' home and Kent's Newport Beach office. First, they wanted to play it cool. They arrived at Kent's employee parking garage in plain clothes and asked him if something had recently happened at Plaza Vista Elementary. Kent spoke willingly about his son getting locked out of the school, but there was no reason to rehash the past. The police asked if he knew Kelly Peters, and suddenly, Kent grew frustrated. He said he didn't know her and asked if he were being recorded. Detective Andriozzi told him he was. Kent said he wanted a lawyer, and Detective Andriozzi served him with a search warrant. They searched his car and found diet pills in a bag identical to the one they had found in Kelly's car. Police went to the Easters' home, where Jill was playing basketball with her daughter. She refused to speak to them, but the couple's smartphones were seized as evidence. A month after finding the drugs in Kelly's car, police called her with solid evidence that the Easters had planted them. However, after a year of investigation, they never arrested anybody. Kelly was riddled with anxiety and scared to come home to someone ready to hurt her in her apartment. She was afraid to go anywhere alone. She cried often and had terrible dreams about Jill coming to harm her. Irvine, her safe haven, no longer seemed so safe. Their lawyers told the Easters that they wouldn't be arrested without advance notice. They could arrange bail ahead of time and avoid handcuffs, a luxury for those with money and legal protection. But in June 2012, the Irvine police obtained warrants for the arrests of Kent and Jill Easter. This was especially lethal to Kent's career as a partner in the law firm and the family's breadwinner. Police found their DNA on the drugs planted in Kelly's car. Though there was more evidence against Kent, Jill took the fall. As a lawyer, she knew that this quasi-confession meant that she and Kent could be tried separately. There was relatively little evidence against her, and a good chance she would be found not guilty. So if she got a not guilty verdict, she could confess to planting the evidence in Kent's defense case so that he could be found not guilty too. Because of the double jeopardy rule, the court could not try her for the same crime. But the motion was denied. They had to stand trial together. At trial, Kent was painted as the emasculated husband. He was the victim of a manipulative wife who forced him to participate in a felony. When Kent took the stand, he talked about how his wife was obsessed with ruining Kelly's career and had planted the drugs in her PT Cruiser that day. He knew his wife was having an affair, and he wanted to do anything to win back her affection. The day of the drug plant, he said that he and Kelly had swapped phones, which explained why her phone was pinging on a phone tower near the home, and his was closer to Kelly's apartment. At the time, Kent claimed he was at home sleeping and recovering from recent surgery. He thought Jill was home taking care of their daughter, but she was actually planting drugs in Kelly's car. Later that day, Kent went to work when Jill called him. She said Kelly was driving crazily around the school parking lot and asked him to call the police. So he did. As the prosecutor stood up, the defense took a sigh of relief. They thought they had already won. But Kent's phone argument didn't hold up. Why would Jill leave her phone, which Kent claimed to know the passcode to, at home? Wouldn't that phone have evidence of her ongoing affair? What would have been the reason for them to switch phones? The jury did not reach a verdict that day because one woman pitied Kent. A few months later, there was another trial with a new jury. This time, Jill took the stand. Jill and Kent were both disbarred, faced jail time, and owed $5.7 million to Kelly in compensatory damages. Kent contemplated taking his own life so Jill could collect his life insurance. She objected to the idea. Meanwhile, Jill thought about fleeing the country with the children. He filed for divorce, and Jill petitioned for custody. Thus began a nasty court battle that brought out Kent's drinking problem and Jill's love affairs. More than 5 years after the Easter's guilty verdict, their personal lives have not recovered. Jill changed her name to Ava Everhart. Kent filed for bankruptcy and has a hard time dating. He still speaks about his ex-wife as if they're still in love. Kelly now walks through the streets of Irvine without worrying about people trying to take down her reputation. She feels safe again. Here are a few of the wildest nurses out there. Number 9. Lakeisha McGee. Nurse Lakeisha McGee waited until she was out of work to commit her crime. Nurse McGee found herself at the J&J Dollar Store in Houston County, Georgia, where she liked to play video poker. First, it seemed like every other time she had been in there until 3 gunmen burst through the door. As soon as they entered the building, one man went into the office and another went to take money from McGee and the only other customer in there. Shots rang out and soon the 3 men fled the scene. Once they were gone, McGee called 911 to report what happened. This was where the case took an odd turn. McGee went to check the wounds on the clerk, which turned out to be fatal. She was then seen cutting power to the security system before stealing a bunch of lottery tickets. Homicide detectives reviewing footage from the store watched her do it and promptly arrested her. She was charged with 1 count of theft and 1 count of tampering with evidence. It's alarming how quickly McGee turned from a victim to a criminal when the opportunity presented itself. Number 8. Julie Duvuano and Melissa Uraro. 2 New York nurses named Julie Duvuano and Melissa Uraro had the entire bootleg vaccine card operation exposed in early 2022. The ladies made over $1 million just by selling the cards to customers that didn't want to get vaccinated against COVID-19. Like the Prohibition runners back in the day, the nurses found a way to distribute their goods. Even though the government doesn't want it, it seems like the spirit of rebellion still runs through New York's veins. Not only did they sell COVID cards to people that never got vaccinated, but they also entered false information into the system to cover their tracks. The bootleggers only operated for 2 months, but still turned a massive profit. Julie owned and operated Wild Child Pediatric Healthcare in Long Island, New York. She and her employee Melissa were charging a pretty penny for their fraudulent products. They charged adults $220 for a card and the information to back it, while kid cards cost $85. The Suffolk County Police Department opened an investigation into the women. On multiple occasions, the ladies sold cards to undercover officers. Once the two women were arrested, their houses got searched and the police found what they were looking for. They seized over $900,000 and a ledger that followed the scheme's profit from the very beginning. During the seizure, the officers found some of the money in helmet bags that are only issued by the NYPD. This find indicated that her husband, an NYPD officer, must have been helping her. He went under investigation as well. Police made one more arrest before it was all said and done. DeFuano's receptionist, 29-year-old Brooke Hogan, was arrested and charged like the others. All three women were charged with forgery in the second degree, and DeFuano caught an extra charge for offering a false instrument for filing. All of these charges carry heavy prison sentences. Number 7. Amanda Martinez. This former nurse in Central Texas fell prey to one of the many pitfalls of social media: misinformation. She was the target of a cancel campaign after being falsely identified in a viral video. She definitely was not the nurse that the internet thought gone wild. The video was of another woman named Amanda Martinez who threw hot soup in a restaurant employee's face. Internet detectives took matters into their own hands and hunted the soup tosser down. Unfortunately, they found the wrong Amanda, and instead of listening when Amanda said it wasn't her, the internet doubled down. The internet mob called the hospital and demanded Amanda be fired. She also received threats from anonymous people on social media. It wasn't until the police arrested the real soup thrower that internet sleuths realized their mistake. Amanda said in an interview that the only thing she wants people to take away from her situation is to not jump to conclusions. You shouldn't accuse someone of a crime until you're positive it's them. Number 6. Italian anti-vaxxer. Anywhere that tragedy strikes, opportunists will find a way to profit. Italy is no exception and has had its fair share of instances where people who don't want to take the shot met up with people who want to profit from them. In Palermo, Italy, a nurse was caught on video pretending to give COVID shots. While it seems like a standard injection to most people, she was actually emptying the syringe into a tissue before injecting her patients. She named all of her accomplices after police arrested her. She explained how the scheme worked in a bid to get out of trouble. When questioned on why she would do such a thing, the woman explained that she needed money to support her son in college. She was charged with forgery and embezzlement. Vaccine scams were all too common in Italy between 2020 and 2021. There are all kinds of reports of people trying to game the system. Doctors pretending to inject people and patients coming in with fake arms are some of the ways people try to be slick. Number 5. 3 nurses. In Orlando, 3 nurses were arrested for their terrible treatment of an elderly disabled patient. Christopher Lazada, Christina Hyson, and Linda Moore were all on duty at Select Specialty Hospital when a patient came in with hypothermia. There are many medically accepted ways to treat someone with hypothermia. Giving them blankets and warm liquids to drink are the first things to try. If the situation worsens, medical professionals can warm up the patient's blood or even give them an IV with warm liquid inside. However, you should never put hot things on your skin to combat hypothermia. You'd expect registered nurses to know this, but instead, they responded to the situation as they'd never heard of hypothermia. Instead of following the standard practices, the 3 nurses filled up bags with hot water from a coffee maker. They then placed the bags all over the patient's body. This is where their lack of knowledge turned into pure neglect, as they left the patient alone for hours. Another nurse walked into the room and found the horrible sight. The patient had severe third-degree burns from the bags all over their body. The injuries were so severe that they needed multiple surgeries afterward. After the incident came to light, warrants went out for the 3 nurses' arrest. They were charged with aggravated abuse and neglect of a disabled adult. Unfortunately, they were let out on bail and still have their medical licenses. Number 4. William Davis. William Davis was sentenced in October 2021 after he committed some truly heinous acts. Davis was a nurse working at Christus Trinity Mother Frances Hospital in Tyler, Texas. He was fired in 2018, but not before he took the lives of 4 patients who were fresh off successful heart surgeries. Davis took the lives of Rondell Clark, Christopher Greenway, John Lafferty, and Joseph Kalina by injecting air into their arteries. He was seen on camera entering all of their rooms moments before everything went wrong. Davis didn't show any real emotion during his trial, except when he heard the testimony from one of his victims' widows. He didn't even bat an eye after the jury returned a verdict 2 hours after they started deliberation. While he never gave a reason for the crimes, the prosecution claimed that he enjoyed doing it. They pointed to video footage that showed him watching the monitors of one of his victims until it flatlined. Number 3. Alex Wubbles. In July of 2017, Body cam footage of a Salt Lake City officer forcibly arresting a nurse at a hospital went viral. The video was released when police and the use of excessive force were an ongoing topic in America. The unique timing of the footage caused an explosion of outrage, washing over the university that owns the hospital, the police, and all of Salt Lake City. The video was released by the nurse, Alex Wubbles, and her lawyer. The footage starts normal enough, with Wubbles showing an officer a printout of the hospital's policies. The policy states that unless the patient is under arrest, their blood cannot be drawn without permission or a warrant. Both Wubbles and the officer in question later said they were following orders. In this battle of orders, her opponent was Detective Jeff Payne, and he was not happy when she wouldn't let him draw the patient's blood. He's seen in the video becoming increasingly agitated as multiple people explained to him that he's making a mistake. After a few moments of discussion, Payne's fuse reached its limit, and he blew up. He lunged towards Wubbles, exclaiming, "We're done," and arrested her. The nurse was cool, calm, and collected until that point. She even kept her manners in place and called the officer "sir" throughout the ordeal. Once he started arresting her, that composure went right out the window. He slapped on the cuffs and pushed Wubbles out the door and towards his car. She screamed at the top of her lungs, letting anyone within a mile radius know she didn't do anything wrong. The detective should have listened when he was told he was making a mistake. The ordeal cost him and the state of Utah a whole lot. Detective Payne was fired, and his watch commander was demoted. Wubbles and her attorney sued the hospital, the university that owns it, and Utah itself. She eventually settled for $500,000. Nurse Wubbles told CNN that she was very grateful for the settlement and that she never asked for any of it to happen. The whole situation fell into her lap. Wubbles said that she would use a good chunk of the money to help people access body cam footage that they are involved with. And the weirdest fact in all of this, Alex Wubbles is a former Olympian. She competed under the name Alex Schaffer in alpine skiing in the 1998 and 2002 Winter Olympics. Number 2. Redonda Vaught. She was a nurse at a Tennessee hospital back in 2017, and on this day after Christmas, she accidentally dosed a patient with the wrong medication. Unfortunately, the elderly patient passed away from the injection a short time later. The nurse's part in the death seemed to be swept under the rug until an anonymous tip was given to the Centers for Medicare and Medicaid Services, or CMS for short, in late 2018. At first glance, the situation seemed like an open and shut case of negligence on the part of Redonda. However, as things played out, many different angles showed themselves. Redonda was arrested and charged with impaired adult abuse and criminal reckless homicide. The criminal trial was pushed back to March 2022 due to the pandemic. The incident also cost Redonda her nursing license when disciplinary action was filed against her by the Tennessee Board of Nursing. In total, the board accused her of 3 different violations. Redonda spoke during the hearing to give her side of the story. Surprisingly, she accepted what she'd done and her part in the situation. However, she also brought unsafe practices to light that she believes led to the tragedy. Redonda explained that the system to get medicine for patients has many issues. The biggest seems to be the way it defaults to searching for generic brands instead of name brands. Redonda encountered this when she put in the medicine's name and it came up with no results. Confused, she overwrote it and took the only medicine that came up when she typed in the first 2 letters. After all, she was under the impression that this was the medicine prescribed by the patient's doctor. However, that assumption led to the elderly patient's death, and the debate is still ongoing. Who is at fault? The hospital and their confusing system, or the nurse who failed to double-check the medication? Number 1. Kristen Johnson. The medical board that oversees New York's healthcare system has taken away medical licenses for many reasons. However, when Kristen Johnson came before them, her case caught them off guard. Kristen was at risk of losing her license because she took pictures of 2 patients' private areas while they were unconscious. We wonder if her name really is Miss Johnson, or if that's just what her friends started calling her after receiving the pictures. Taking nude photos of someone while unconscious is a crime that carries serious consequences. Initially, Miss Johnson was charged with a felony that could have sent her to prison. Instead, she was offered a plea deal and a reduced sentence as long as she gave up her medical license. The aspiring photographer narrowly avoided years of taking nude pictures with a prison phone. The police found Sherry Papini on Thanksgiving Day 2016 wrapped in chains and covered in bruises while walking on a country road hundreds of miles from her home in Shasta County, California. They quickly brought her to the station. Then, Papini told them a story straight out of a cheesy crime thriller. Papini went missing on November 2nd. She told the cops how that morning she'd gone jogging in Redding, California when she was suddenly attacked. Papini claims 2 masked criminals kidnapped her while she was jogging. According to Papini, they threatened her her with weapons and ordered her to go with them. When she arrived at the station on Thanksgiving, Papini sat down with a sketch artist. She described each kidnapper vividly. Papini told police the kidnappers were two Hispanic women wearing bandanas over their mouths as a disguise. The police, though dumbfounded, believed Papini. They'd been looking for her for 22 days and were glad to have solved this case. For 22 days, no one had a clue where she was, not even her husband Keith. The good citizens of Redding spent countless hours helping the scared husband look for his wife. They worked together to put up signs and posters while searching every square foot of Shasta County looking for Papini. When she finally turned up 22 days later, the community went through a genuine roller coaster of emotion. Papini, by all appearances, was a supermom. She regularly posted photos with her beloved husband Keith on social media. Sherry was also raising 2 kids while managing her family's household. She was the quintessential blonde suburban supermom. The locals were shocked that someone like Papini could go missing in a quiet town like theirs. They also wanted to help the family she left behind. When Papini was at last reunited with her family, the town celebrated alongside them. Eventually, however, the excitement wore off, and the town realized something quite unsettling. 2 kidnappers were still on the loose. Shasta County Sheriff Michael L. Johnson told the media the first few years after Papini's return were scary times. He says that Shasta County wasn't prepared for something like this. In fact, he described the community as safe, quiet, unassuming, and tight-knit. If something happens to someone, the whole town hears about it and acts accordingly. Johnson recalls how the people of Shasta hid in their homes, stopped jogging, and stayed home instead of going out at night. Shasta County residents were afraid of being kidnapped. Their fears were fueled by rumors of traffickers and abductors in the area. Still, there was no evidence to support that kind of activity, nothing but Sherry's story. Nevertheless, they had all seen Papini wrapped in chains, head shaved, covered in bruises, dirt, and grime. The police also reported that Papini's ankles were restrained with hose clamps. They presumed the kidnappers put the hose clamps on Papini to keep her in their lair. They must have gone to great lengths to scare and hurt poor Papini. Those images stuck with them for several years. So did the vivid police sketches Papini described to the artist, meaning these 2 women had to be real. They might return to Shasta County for another victim. Meanwhile, Papini was back to being a mom again. Thanks to her alleged kidnappers, she was also $30,000 richer. California has what they call a kidnapping compensation program. The compensatory payments are issued by the California Victims Compensation Board. Kidnapping victims often lose months or even years of their lives. On top of that, victims are usually burdened with medical bills that cover treating injuries they may have sustained and/or therapy. The Compensation Board likes to help alleviate those burdens in any way they can. In 2010, the board awarded J.C. Dugard $20 million after she was kidnapped and held in captivity for 20 years. In other words, Dugard received $1 million for each year that was stolen from her, a compensation rate she more than deserved. But there's a catch, even for victims like Dugard. If you want kidnapping compensation, then you have to apply for it. The board ultimately decides whether or not you need compensation from the state. Papini applied for a settlement as soon as she got home. As mentioned earlier, Papini received $30,000 for 22 days. She used the check to pay for PTSD therapy sessions and the ambulance that brought her to the hospital when she escaped. The compensation board gladly awarded the settlement, despite there being no evidence that anyone kidnapped her. A fact many investigators in Shasta found odd. County authorities, local police departments, and even the FBI helped investigate Papini's alleged kidnapping. Still, they found no empirical evidence to back up her story. They never found the 2 Hispanic women wearing bandanas. They also couldn't find any evidence at the site of the kidnapping. There were no witnesses and no items left behind. All the investigators had was Papini's testimony, her injuries, the chains, and the hose clamps. They searched 5 years before finding anything substantial, though it wasn't what they or anyone else expected. In early March of 2022, the United States Attorney's Office for the Eastern District of California announced they were arresting Papini on fraud charges. They said investigators found evidence that contradicted her original kidnapping story. The police, alongside a team of FBI investigators, discovered where Papini had disappeared on November 2nd, 2016, Costa Mesa, California. Costa Mesa is a suburban paradise nestled in Orange County, about 600 miles away from Redding. So what was Papini doing that far away from her family? The investigators determined that Papini traveled to Costa Mesa to be with her ex-boyfriend, not because 2 Hispanic women held her at gunpoint. While everyone in California was looking for her, Papini was in sunny Costa Mesa with her ex. The Shasta County and Redding police departments were outraged. They'd been searching for Papini's abductors for nearly 6 years for nothing. Sheriff Johnson called Papini selfish, callous, and unsympathetic to all the pain she caused. He particularly called her out for the fear she injected into Redding and surrounding towns. He says that countless public and private resources were spent trying to find her and and keep her safe and healthy. And that's not including her $30,000 settlement. Sheriff Johnson went on to say how happy he was that someone who caused the town so much suffering is now facing justice. When Sherry went missing, the first person the police interrogated was her husband, Keith. Everyone knows the husband is always the first suspect in any investigation. However, it didn't take the police long to figure out Keith was innocent. He breezed through a lie detector test and had an alibi. The police dismissed him as a suspect and kept looking. They didn't find anything for several days until Papini mysteriously emerged. Police collected evidence off Papini when they found her. They wanted to see if they could find some DNA on her to match with the suspects. They were expecting to find the DNA of at least one Hispanic female suspect. Instead, they got a match for someone already in their system, someone who was definitely not a Hispanic woman. The DNA belonged to Papini's ex-boyfriend, someone the police never considered. They immediately sent officers and agents to Orange County to look for him. Since he wasn't trying to hide, they didn't have a hard time finding him. The investigators questioned Papini's ex, and he gave them the whole story. Papini had called him in early November asking if he could drive up to Redding and pick her up. He asked why. She told him that Keith was always cruel to her, and the Redding police weren't doing anything about it. She didn't feel safe anymore. However, the LA Times found no records of Papini ever filing a complaint against Keith. Nevertheless, the ex believed her and drove up to Redding on November 2nd at her request. He picked her up and drove them 600 miles down to his home in Costa Mesa. She left behind her phone and her 2 children, who she was supposed to pick up from daycare after her morning jog. In fact, that's how Keith realized his wife was missing. Their kids were still at daycare when he got home from work that day. Meanwhile, Papini was with her ex. He says she stayed at his house for 3 weeks before asking to go to Redding just before Thanksgiving Day. The FBI found a witness who saw Papini walking freely around her ex's apartment. However, Papini's ex said the weeks they spent together were never romantic. Regardless, investigators had what they needed. They kept investigating the scam until they gathered enough evidence to prosecute Papini. That's when the attorney's office made the announcement. Up to that point, in March 2022, Papini was sticking to her kidnapping claim. 2 years before, in 2020, Papini reiterated her story to FBI investigators. They already knew about the DNA evidence and wanted to give Papini the chance to come clean. She did not. They knew she was lying. In a couple of years, they'd make their move, and what a move it was. Papini's family was outraged after her arrest on March 3rd, 2022. They even released a statement. Police arrested Papini right in front of her 2 children. The family wrote that they were appalled by how the police ruthlessly ambushed Papini and cuffed her in front of everyone. The Papini family claimed their beloved Sherry would have complied with law enforcement and simply gone down to the station. Papini herself never corroborated their claim, however. The arrest was, nonetheless, humiliating, but not as humiliating as the truth. Papini's secret was out, every little detail of it. Shasta County learned the news rather quickly. They could now rest a little easier knowing there aren't any abductors or traffickers in town. Redding residents also learned the twisted ways Papini made her 22-day vacation look like a kidnapping. Her ex-boyfriend told police that Papini asked him to help her look kidnapped. She shaved her head, scratched herself, and made some burn marks while the ex did the rest. According to her ex, Papini asked him to shoot her in the leg with a hockey puck. He did what she asked. Once satisfied with the number of bruises, she asked him to brand her. Papini's ex says he heated up a wood-burning tool and obeyed her command. She wanted her appearance to look convincing enough for the cops and compensation board anyway, in which she definitely succeeded. The citizens of Redding believed her for 5 years. Now, they get to watch Papini suffer for her twisted actions. After her arrest, the authorities revealed her charges and potential sentencing options. They didn't sound too good for Papini. Papini was charged with making false statements to a federal law enforcement officer and mail fraud. The false statement charge only carries a maximum of 5 years, which usually means a 2-year sentence, which is often shortened on good behavior. The mail fraud charge, however, wields a 20-year maximum sentence. Papini committed mail fraud when she applied for a kidnapping compensation settlement and testified before the board that she'd been kidnapped. She's gonna have a difficult time disproving that charge. The prosecutors are also fining Papini $250,000 for each charge. If the judge agrees, Papini will go from earning $30,000 to being $500,000 in debt. Here are a few of the dumbest way to bribe people. Number 10. The rapper. Krayshawn Bates, known as hip-hop artist Lil Cray, tried to bribe 2 police deputies with $35,000 cash for them not to arrest him. In January 2017, Lil Cray called the police saying that he had a flat tire and was going to miss his court-ordered curfew. He was slurring his speech, so police went to his home, where they found Lil Cray drunk and gambling with 8 others while free on bond. He challenged the police officer's ability to give him a breathalyzer test, but when he finally agreed, they discovered a blood alcohol content of 0.119. Lil Cray was brought back to jail on a $10,000 bond. He was so drunk that they had to take his mugshot while he slept on a bench. Lil Cray's rap sheet was already long. He was out on bond for trying to take some out in Cleveland, and this was his third arrest while out on bail. Prosecutors claim he was gang affiliated, making them extra diligent when handling his case. Some of the irony in this is that the judge allowed Lil Cray to shoot a music video in his courtroom, even though the judge was aware of the rapper's pending charges and criminal record. Judge Ryan stood by his decision, saying everyone is innocent until proven guilty, but admitted that allowing Lil Cray to film in a courtroom wasn't one of his wisest decisions. Lil Cray is open for T.I. and was asked to perform at SXSW. He's quickly making a name for himself in hip-hop, but not making the best impression on law enforcement. Number 9. La Mexicana. Loriana Aguirre proved there are many ways to become internet famous after crashing into several parked cars in Guanajuato, Mexico. Still tipsy from her drunk driving spree, officers had to hold her up while walking her away from the scene of the accident. Her arrest, however, gave her 200,000 followers on social media, a new internet identity, and even a mobile game, and it cost her about $5. Lorena collided with a series of parked cars while driving heavily intoxicated. Luckily, no one was injured by her actions. When the police arrived, Lorena was still sitting in her car, dazed and confused by what was happening around her. As the police began questioning Lorena after her initial crash, Lorena tried bribing her way out of trouble. She flashed a 100 peso note to the cops. Even though 100 pesos sounds like a lot, it's only worth a little over $5. Apparently, the cops were not enticed by this hefty sum. She then tried flirting a bit with the arresting officers, but the cops still forced her to exit her vehicle. The strangeness of her arrest led to Lorena becoming an internet star, getting 200,000 followers and trending on Twitter with the hashtag Lady100Pesos. Someone even made a mobile app where the objective was to avoid being arrested by throwing peso notes at oncoming cops. Maybe Lorena should try more than the cost of a deli sandwich the next time she wants to bribe some officers. Number 8. The Health Inspector. Brothers John and Jack DeSanto, alongside their cousin Robert Cuba, own 3 restaurants on the same city street in Brooklyn, New York. These 3 men thought they could try to get a tip-off when their next surprise inspections would be, and hatched a scheme that required a Department of Health employee to play along. The plan was to bribe the DOH employee with $1,000 worth of entries into their Super Bowl betting pool, which could pay up to $50,000 to the winner. All the employee had to do was to give the trio a week's notice before any surprise inspection. However, the flaw in their plan was the integrity of the employee they got in contact with. He immediately reported the bribe to his superiors, and an investigation began on the trio. One of the owners kept a text conversation going with an undercover investigator, even meeting them in person twice. Between the 2 meetings, the investigator collected $16,000 in bribe money. According to Brooklyn police, surprise inspections can be grueling for restaurant owners. Failing health inspections can lead to hefty fines or even restaurant closures, but they ultimately help keep restaurants clean and safe for families to dine. All 3 restaurants, owned by the DeSantos brothers and Robert, had A health ratings with minimal violations. With the evidence collected and the investigation complete, Brooklyn police arrested the 3 owners and took them to court. They were released without bail and were due back in court in January 2022. The story fizzled out after they were caught. Perhaps they bribed the papers not to cover their court case. Number 7. The Maitre d'. Restaurant owners and staff members discovered last summer that bribes can come in many different shapes and sizes, especially in Southampton, New York. As COVID restrictions began to lift, there was a surge in restaurant attendance and reservation lists were flooded. Mitch Modell, former CEO of Modell's Sporting Goods, tried to get a table at 75 Main, a high-end restaurant in Southampton. The bar was full to the brim, and wait times for a table stood at 2 hours. Mitch began to hand out tips to the hosts and servers, hoping to boost his spot on the wait list. He ended up handing out hundreds of dollars to no avail until offering to cover the bill of 2 women, landing him a spot at their table. He joined their party along with 5 of his friends, leaving a sea of angry diners in the line behind them. Reservation lists have become a battlefield as guests are giving high-end bribes to staff members to guarantee their spots or move up their reservation dates. These bribes include NASCAR tickets, helicopter rides, flights in private planes, boat trips, and concert tickets. Some guests even bring envelopes full of cash to bribe the staff. According to a regular at Le Bilbo Quay in Sag Harbor, a manager for the restaurant took a small voyage on a guest's yacht and spent the afternoon in the golf clubhouse the guests attended. Ian Duke, the owner of Southampton Social Club, was offered $3,000 from a guest who only wanted a table for the after-dinner drink service. So, if you're trying to get a reservation at any high-end New York restaurants anytime soon, be prepared to shell out your life savings worth in tips. Number 6. The Landlord. In December 2015, tenants of an apartment building in Bushwick, New York, awoke to an aggressive banging on their doors. A man was marching up and down the 4-story building, screaming that everyone had 72 hours to evacuate. If they didn't comply, the man threatened the tenants would be taken away in handcuffs. Many of the elderly residents were scared for their lives. But it turned out to be a ruse devised by the landlord and 2 inspectors from New York City's Department of Housing and Urban Development. It was all part of a bribery scandal involving dozens of city employees. Court documents revealed that landlords paid inspectors to fabricate building code violations and other complaints. Some of the payoffs were only for a few $100, which doesn't seem worth it. The city website showed more than 50 unsolved violations for the building, including leaks, lead paint hazards, cold water, bed bugs, and much more. With enough violations, the tenants could be served with an order to vacate, thus freeing up the space for new tenants. The landlord of the Bushwick building wanted his tenants out. It's unclear why, but perhaps because Bushwick is becoming a gentrified, valuable neighborhood whose buildings can be revamped and rented or sold at much higher prices. When tenants didn't pay their rent on time, he was eager to kick them out. Investigators conducted a wiretap into the landlord's phone and discovered that he paid inspectors $700 to pretend there was a vacate order. The landlord and both inspectors pleaded not guilty. Number 5. The Fan. When police in New Mexico spotted a Texas truck swerving in and out of lanes, they pulled the driver over and discovered he had been drinking and driving. The driver, Tyler Handley, openly admitted to driving drunk after coming from a sports bar where he was watching the Dallas Cowboys game. Handley was decked out in Cowboys gear and refused to take a sobriety test. While the officer checked Handley's belongings, Handley made him an offer. He asked if the officer's body camera was on, and then offered him $10,000 cash if he let him go. What would have been a misdemeanor WDI then turned into a felony bribery charge. Handley was taken to the police station where his behavior shocked police. He tried to pee on the floor, break the handcuffs, and insulted officers. This was Handley's 3rd DWI charge. We bet it coincides with how the Cowboys play on any given Sunday. Number 4. The Sharer. In another shocking police bribery case, one man tried to get out of a DUI by offering the police officer a beer. Lazaro Hernandez was pulled over at around 3 a.m. for trying to pass an officer who was directing traffic near an accident. Hernandez said he thought the traffic officer was waving him through when he passed. When he was pulled over at a traffic stop, police officers smelled alcohol on his breath and administered a field sobriety test. Hernandez defended himself, saying that he had a drink 13 hours before. He got increasingly more upset as he performed poorly in the sobriety test and eventually refused to do the walking portion. The officer placed him under arrest for a DUI. While sitting in the back of the patrol car, he tried to hand the officer a beer, and when that didn't work, $400 cash. He was trying to negotiate the impending DUI charge to super speeding. The officer refused the bribe and took Hernandez to the county jail, where he was charged with driving under the influence, bribery, open container, reckless driving, and failure to obey authorized persons directing traffic. Number 3. The Vaccine Lovers. Sometimes bribery and public health lines get blurry, especially during COVID-19. In January 2022, Chicago Mayor Lori Lightfoot tweeted a picture of stacks of cash spelling out the words, "Get Vaxxed," to encourage citizens to get vaccinated. Lightfoot has been serious about the COVID-19 public health crisis, but this was seen as a pathetic attempt to convince people to do something in exchange for precisely $826. She previously mandated vaccines for all Chicago city workers unless they are willing to get tested twice per week. She also issued a vaccine mandate for numerous business patrons, especially for gyms, restaurants, and entertainment venues. She threatened to shut down businesses that did not enforce the vaccine mandate for their customers. But this recent tweet was met with laughter rather than respect. But Lightfoot isn't the only one to incentivize people to get vaccinated. Many states offered jackpots and grand prizes in the millions of dollars for people who got the COVID vaccine. Private companies got on the bandwagon as well, with Krispy Kreme offering free donuts to vaccinated patrons and Uber and Lyft offering free rides to people on their way to get the shot. But for some people, it'll take a lot more than $826 to get the jab. Number 2. The Philosopher. Florida police charged Ariel Engert, a philosophy student at the University of Florida, with driving under the influence of drug charges after she was pulled over for weaving her car around Clearwater, Florida, early in the morning. Ariel failed several field sobriety tests, and the police found that her blood alcohol content was over double the legal limit for being behind the wheel. The police arrested her when they discovered a small amount of drugs in her purse, adding possession to the charge. Once at the county jail, Ariel was determined to bribe her way out of the misdemeanors. She offered Deputy Brian Sudbrink certain adult favors if he dismissed the charges and let her go. The offer gave Ariel her first bribery charge. While in county jail, the police discovered another small bag of narcotics tucked into Ariel's bra, giving her 2 more felony charges for possession and bringing illegal substances into a detention facility. She then made 2 more attempts to bribe the police to let her go, making the same offer to Munoz and Biddle's deputies. 2 bribery charges later, Ariel was freed from custody after posting a $5,000 bond. In the end, Ariel racked up a DUI charge, marijuana possession, narcotics transport into the county jail, and 3 different bribery charges to add to her criminal record. This wasn't her first charge for drunk driving and possession, according to police records, so it's probably safe to say it won't be her last time being charged either. Number 1. The Restaurateur. Apparently, Ann Pizitz missed all those roadside billboards warning about the dangers of drinking and driving. Police caught up with Ann on August 3, 2019, but what should have been a misdemeanor turned into a felony and a much higher penalty to pay. Starting as a food truck and growing to a franchise, Ann co-founded Melt, a grilled cheese restaurant with several locations in Alabama. A concerned citizen called the police complaining about a reckless driver. When the police arrived to investigate, they found Ann in her black Mercedes driving rather erratically. They pulled her over to find her texting and reeking of alcohol. She failed several field sobriety tests and refused to take a breathalyzer. Now, this would be a pretty run-of-the-mill DUI charge. However, once Ann arrived at the Madison County Jail, she made one last attempt to get out of trouble. She offered one of the officers $1,000 to forget this happened and let her walk, even threatening the stability of the officer's position as a public servant. The grilled cheese queen of Alabama thought she had some pull in local government. The bribe upped the ante, although she was heavily intoxicated when she made the offer. Unfortunately for Ann, the officer she bribed had his body cam rolling, capturing the whole thing on camera. According to jail records, the attempted bribe raised her bail to $6,000. Unable to pay up, she spent the night in jail. Moral of the story? When billboards tell you not to drink and drive, listen. Click here to watch one of these next videos. And let us know in the comment section how much you think is appropriate to tip when it comes to getting in clubs and restaurants.